Today we see if the starter motor works. The recall starter handle was missing. The engine's only been turned over by a spanner on the end of the crankshaft. I've just taken the recall starter cup off the end of the crankshaft there. First thing I noticed is there's a spring that is on there that was right up against the lip at the front there. And then when I look in through the hole there, shine a bit of light in, there's another spring laying around the shaft in there. So whether the oil seal's got normally two springs on it, I figured it was just a normal TC style oil seal. Not sure. It's normally $40 if you buy it from Suzuki, or about $2.50 if you buy it from a bearing place if it's just a normal TC seal. But anyway, that leads to all this oil throwing out the front of here when I turn the motor over. I've taken the oil seal out of there and just sat it on here. It's got no springs in it and it's flopping around like a cock in a corridor. So no wonder the oil just poured past that when I tipped the motor on its side. The springs, one there and one there, are both the same size. This might be some sort of double lip seal. It has two springs in it, making it a crankcase seal, more so than just a TC standard type seal. I'm going to replace it with just a TC type seal and see how it goes. If it's no good, I might have to shell out the $40 to buy the proper one at some stage, but the worst that can happen is I can see a bit of oil running out of this bottom of the recall starter at some point in time. But anyway, that's got to the bottom of why the oil just wanted to pour through there when the motor was on its side. I've bought Katana batteries in the past. The size I buy is YTX14BSFA. In Australia, they've now been rebranded Century. Now Century have been the distributor for those for some time, but now they're being retailed with the Century brand on them. Same product. I was at Battery World and they were listed as $128, and then when I go back to Battery World they try to sell me the Century one at $149. I think that's the same price that Super Cheap have them. I told Battery World that their website still showed the Katana one at $128, so they sold me the new one at $128. So happy days on that score. I've attached the wiring loom and all of the ignition parts to the bike engine mount here. I'm going to rethink that a little bit. What I want to do initially is just run the starter motor. So I'm going to mount the starter motor up. That's just a bung in the hole there at the moment. It will come out. I want to run the leads on the starter motor. First of all, I want to check the starter motor runs without being plugged in at all. I know the little ratchet in here, when I turn the cog, turns one way and not the other, which is the right thing for the starter clutch working, so that's a good thing. I'm going to actually disconnect all that loom again, leave the items mounted like I've got them. Just go back to the basics. I'll test the starter motor on its own, then put leads on the starter motor and try them, bring them down and only use the starter solenoid here. Just release the loom from the starter solenoid there and just put a couple of alligator clips on. I attached all this loom stuff to the motor jig last night and I'm having a bit of a rethink this morning. I think I will do things in stages. First thing I'm going to do is test the starter motor, not on the bike, just with a couple of leads on its terminals to see whether it spins. Then I'll fit it. I know that the starter clutch in there is working, because I can rotate the gear one way and I can't the other way, so that's the correct thing to be happening. So the starter motor, if it runs, should attempt to turn the motor over. From the leads that are attached to the starter motor, one of them's a negative lead, which will go back to the negative battery, and the other one will come back, the positive will come back to this side of the starter solenoid, which has got the positive lead from the battery to the other side of the starter solenoid here. I'm going to disconnect the loom from the starter solenoid so that I can test the starter solenoid just with an alligator clip. I'll ground one side and put an alligator clip on the other and see whether I can get the starter solenoid to click. That will start the starter motor, and then I will start attaching loom stuff so that I can start the starter motor from over here. That'll involve the ignition, a lot of the ignition stuff attached, but it won't involve having the stator or the coil or the CDI box, or even the won't need the voltage regulator attached while I've got a good battery. Should be able to get a neutral light come up because the neutral switch will be plugged in. Only worrying about getting the thing to turn over at this stage. The next stage will be to try and see if I got a spark. I've given the starter motor a bit of a wire brush, and then I've also brushed out this valley section here that was full of corrosion. I'm now going to fit the wires to the starter motor and give it a buzz on the battery. I've just got the positive lead here that I'm going to touch on the battery, and there's the starter motor sitting there. I better grab it before it jumps off the table. So it's running fine. So I wanted to test this starter relay. I've got the battery lead coming through to the main terminal there, and the starter motor positive lead coming off the other side. And these two little terminals on the front there are the coil for the starter relay. And I've got positive connected there via that yellow alligator clip, and negative goes to this one. And if I've got this ring as a contactor, there's not a lot of current needing to pass through the coil, so it won't spark much. And you can hear the click that that's making, and at the same time the starter motor up there is running. I've got the starter motor temporarily mounted to one of the mounting points there so that it's not flogging around like it was before. This starter relay is working fine, so I'll continue on hooking up more of the loom now. I'll see whether I can get a trigger to that from on-off switch here once part of the loom's connected. So that's the starter relay wired into the main loom now. This is the neutral relay, and these are two of the main fuses, a 15 amp and a 10 amp one. I don't know, I think that one's the main one, so I put the 15 there. I need to check the diagram to see whether that's the right one. That's a 10 on there. I think that just does the rear power point. And the third one, which I've got a pretty shitty old fuse for, I think is the thematic fan. Then I've plugged in ignition box with the green and the blue there and that bullet connector, and I've plugged in the run stop light switch through that yellow connector there, which runs up to there. When I turn the ignition on, I get a green light, so that means neutral relay is working, neutral switch is working. Neutral switch is another thing I've got plugged in. I even plugged in the tail light just to check that the third position of this ignition switch works. I'm going to click that to lights, and there's the tail light operating over there. I'll turn it back off again. So the tail light's working. So when I initially tried this run stop switch there, move it to run, push the start button. There's my starter motor on. Now the start button was flaky. You need to press it firmly, otherwise you hear this double clicking, which isn't good. That fuse connector, I think that's the main fuse, has been affected by the sun. I'll replace that at some point. So we've got the ignition connected at the moment. Or at least the ignition switch and the starter solenoid and the neutral relay and the run stop button's all operational. The light switch is operational. Next thing is to see whether we can get spark. So that involves connecting the stator. Oh, well, I'm going to actually fit the starter motor to the engine and see what sort of noises it makes. I'm a little bit concerned about it not having, well, it had all that oil in the sump, probably 2.5 litres of oil in the sump, but I'll put a bit down the bore. I want to just turn it over with the starter motor briefly without a whole lot more oil in it. I think before I try and start it or anything, I need to obviously have a full gut of oil. It's in neutral there, and I've rigged up this lever on the reverse switch temporarily. That means the reverse switch is working. That appears to be the complete electrical system working. It's been a lot of fun today. So hit the subscribe button and get out to your shed and have some fun.